It was supposed to be a simple visit, like clockwork. Every first Tuesday of the month, without fail, Arthur Harrison walked into his local branch of First National Fidelity Bank. 78 years old, with a posture still straight from decades of military service, he was a man who believed in order, in structure, in doing things the right way. He had done his duty, 30 years in the army, most of them spent in logistics under punishing conditions overseas, and now he lived a quieter life. Not easy, but steady. He shared a small, spotless apartment with his wife Martha, who battled a chronic respiratory illness that required constant attention and increasingly expensive medication. Their income was modest, his army pension, her disability check, just enough, no room for mistakes, no room for delays. That morning, before he left, Arthur had brewed a small pot of coffee, kissed Martha on the forehead, and checked his account on his old laptop. The deposit had landed right on time, just like always. Relief, followed by resolve. He tucked the withdrawal slip into his wallet and made his way down to the branch, the same one he'd been banking at since the late 80s. He knew the floor plan by heart, knew the names of half the long-time employees, but today something was different. There were unfamiliar faces behind the counter, new uniforms, fewer smiles. He stepped up to the teller, a young man who couldn't have been older than 20. His name tag read, Kevin. The kid didn't look up at first, fingers already tapping away at his keyboard, distracted and mechanical. Arthur waited patiently. When Kevin finally acknowledged him with a bland, "Can I help you?" Arthur smiled politely and handed over his card and slip. "Arthur Harrison, I'd like to withdraw $400. Kevin swiped the card and began typing again. His face scrunched slightly. He typed something else, then paused, frowned deeper. "There's an issue," he said without looking up. Arthur felt the slightest prickle at the back of his neck. "What kind of issue?" Kevin sighed like he'd been through this a dozen times already that morning. "Your account's under a temporary administrative hold. Something about updated security protocols. It's automatic. No funds can be withdrawn or transferred until the system clears it." Arthur blinked. "A hold on my pension?" Kevin nodded, disinterested. "Yep, system generated. Can't override it from here. But it's a government deposit, my pension. There's nothing irregular about it. It's been coming in the same way every month for years." "Still flagged," Kevin replied, already reaching for a pre-printed pamphlet like it was muscle memory. "You can call the number on here if you want to ask more questions, but it'll probably take 24 to 48 business hours to clear." Arthur didn't take the brochure. "My wife's medication is sitting at the pharmacy right now. It's urgent. We need it today." Kevin finally looked him in the eye, but there was no compassion behind it, just protocol. "There's nothing I can do. The system locks it. We don't have access to override those kinds of holds at the branch level." Arthur stared at the counter, his knuckles tightening on the edge. It wasn't anger that hit first, it was disbelief. Then came frustration, then the sharp sting of helplessness. He had done everything right, checked the deposit, brought the paperwork, followed the routine. But now, suddenly, a nameless update had cut him off from the money that he and Martha depended on to keep her breathing. He tried again, slower this time, with the controlled voice of a man trained to de-escalate conflict. "Son, I understand you're following instructions, but this isn't a minor inconvenience, it's a health crisis. My wife's doctor just changed her medication. It's already at the pharmacy. All I need is access to my own money." Kevin didn't flinch. "Like I said, I can't override a CPU-level flag. Nobody here can. Try the helpline." He pushed the pamphlet across the counter again and turned back to his screen. As far as he was concerned, the conversation was over. Arthur stood there for another moment, not quite believing what had just happened. Not believing that after everything, after the years of service, the decades of loyalty to this bank, the timely deposits, the perfect record, he was being told by someone barely old enough to rent a car that a glitch in the system was more powerful than human judgment. He picked up the paper. The words "We're here to help" were printed across the top in cheery blue font. The irony was almost too much. His hand trembled slightly as he stepped away from the counter, turned and walked toward the small row of lobby chairs near the entrance. He sat down heavily, feeling not just defeated, but dismissed. The weight of it all, the worry, the injustice, the helplessness, pressed down on him like a second gravity. The helpline number glared at him from the page, but he knew exactly what that would be. An automated maze of keypad prompts, long hold times, scripted apologies, and no real solutions. They'd tell him to wait. They always did. And Martha couldn't wait. He sat still, heart pounding, breath shallow, the sounds of the bank swirling around him, keyboard clicks, phone rings, muffled conversation. But his mind was somewhere else now. Back to a different time, a different number, a different voice, a call he hoped he'd never have to make. But some systems don't budge until you shake the foundation. Arthur sat there for several minutes, the cheap pamphlet still in his hand, though he wasn't reading it. He wasn't even looking at it. His gaze was fixed somewhere just beyond the lobby windows, unfocused, like he was trying to see through the glass, through the street, through the very fabric of how this could have happened. Around him, the bank carried on like nothing was wrong. Customers came and went, tellers nodded and smiled at new faces, and the clock on the wall ticked forward without care. But for Arthur, time had stalled. He could still hear Kevin's flat voice echoing in his ears, reciting bank policy like it was gospel, unchangeable and final. He had asked twice respectfully if someone else could help. A manager, maybe someone with the authority to actually make a judgment call. Kevin had shot that down instantly. Miss Evans is in a regional meeting today. She won't be back for hours. Even if she were here, she couldn't override a CPU-level hold. It's above branch-level access. And that was that. It wasn't just the refusal. It was the way the refusal had been delivered. Not with regret, not even with uncertainty, but with apathy. With the cold distance of someone who had memorized the rules, but had never been taught why they mattered. Arthur could almost accept that there was a glitch, that systems sometimes fail. What he couldn't accept was that no one in that building seemed to care that the glitch had a real consequence, a human consequence. His wife's health hung in the balance, and to Kevin, it was just another screen alert, just another flag to be ignored until the system said otherwise. Arthur rubbed his temples. He could already picture what would happen if he tried the helpline. Automated voice. Press 1 for account information. Press 2 for transaction history. Wait music. Transfer. Hold. Scripted apology. Please allow 24 to 48 business hours. He could already hear the smileless voice telling him, "We understand your frustration." No, they didn't. They couldn't. Not when you had to sit across from your wife and tell her the medication she needed today, right now, was out of reach because some algorithm didn't know what a pension was. Because no one had trained Kevin to escalate. Because Miss Evans was at lunch. Because the system didn't recognize urgency. He closed his eyes for a long moment. His breathing was shallow, controlled. If there was one thing the military had drilled into him over the years, it was how to suppress panic, how to think under pressure, how to find clarity in chaos. He needed to act. But not just any action. He needed the right move, the one that would work. And then, like a dusty file pulled from the back of a forgotten cabinet, a memory surfaced. A name, a number. A long time ago, during one of his final assignments before retirement, Arthur had worked with a civilian financial task force on a federal emergency preparedness exercise. He hadn't been in uniform that week. He'd been in a suit, coordinating logistics between military operations and major financial institutions. That's where he'd met him, James Sterling. Back then, Sterling had been sharp, decisive, and a bit impatient with red tape. They hadn't spoken in over a decade, but Arthur remembered the parting handshake. "If the system ever breaks in a way that causes real harm," Sterling had said, "call me. Not for petty stuff, only the serious kind. The kind where no one else listens." Arthur reached slowly into his jacket pocket and pulled out his old flip phone. He didn't even have a smartphone, just something that could call and text. He scrolled through his contacts, the tiny screen glowing in the soft lobby light. There it was. J. Sterling, Corp HQ, Omega Priority. He stared at it, hesitated. This wasn't just some complaint about slow service, this was his last resort. But Martha's health wasn't a theoretical policy problem. It was real. It was happening now. His thumb hovered over the green call button, a deep breath, then he pressed it. The phone rang once, then again, then on the third ring it clicked. "Sterling," came the voice, crisp, unmistakable, no assistant, no hold music. Just him. Arthur cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how long it had been. "Mr. Sterling, this is Arthur Harrison. We served together during the Crimson Eagle Emergency Exercise Financial Liaison Team." There was a pause, then, "Harrison, good God, that was, 15 years ago? How are you?" He didn't wait for a full answer. "You wouldn't be calling this line unless it was serious." Arthur didn't waste a second. He told the story plainly, with the same discipline he'd used for decades. The pension deposit, the administrative hold, the teller's refusal, the lack of escalation, the urgency of the medication. He named the branch. He recited the exact time of the failed transaction. He didn't embellish. He didn't plead. Just the facts. When he finished, the line was silent, except for the soft clicking of a keyboard on the other end. "A CPU hold on a federal pension," Sterling's voice turned cold. "And they told you to just wait? No override, no escalation, no verification attempt?" "That's correct." "Unacceptable." The sound of a car door slamming echoed faintly. "Are you still there? At the branch?" "In the lobby." "Don't move, I'm 7 minutes away." And just like that, the line went dead. Arthur sat in stunned silence, the phone still in his hand, the call already over. 7 minutes, that's what Sterling had said. Not, "I'll see what I can do." Not, "Let me check with my team." Not even, "Give me a few hours." 7 minutes. As if the man had already grabbed his keys and was halfway to the car before Arthur had finished speaking. As if a frozen pension and an urgent medical need were all he needed to hear. Arthur didn't move. He didn't want to risk missing what came next. Something in Sterling's voice had changed when he'd said the word unacceptable. It wasn't just anger, it was a command. The same tone Arthur had heard long ago in war rooms and briefings. The tone of someone about to make something happen. Around him, the bank went on as usual. Customers waited in line. A child cried quietly near the coin machine. A financial advisor called out a name for an appointment that went unanswered. Kevin, the teller, looked up once and briefly locked eyes with Arthur before turning back to his screen with a dismissive little shake of his head. Arthur imagined the kid thought he'd given up, that he was just sitting there sulking, maybe waiting for someone from customer service to pick up. He wasn't. He was waiting for the storm. The minutes passed slowly, but Arthur counted them. 1, 2, 3. At 5, he started to feel the slight flutter of anticipation, that strange adrenaline you get not in the fight, but just before it. He could feel it in his shoulders, in his chest. At 6 minutes, the bank's atmosphere felt the same, but Arthur could sense a change approaching like a pressure drop before a thunderclap. Then, exactly on time, the main doors of the bank opened with a sudden gust of air from outside. 3 people stepped inside, but it was the man in front who caught everyone's attention, instantly and completely. James Sterling. Late 50s, steel grey at the temples, athletic posture, sharp tailored suit that somehow made everyone else in the building look underdressed. His face was set like carved stone, not angry in the way people usually are, but cold, focused, lethal. You didn't have to know who he was to know that he was in charge. The room didn't go quiet because anyone told it to. It simply obeyed instinct. Sterling walked through the lobby like a missile. No hesitation, no glance at the lines, no need to check in. He was already heading directly for the man sitting calmly in the corner, waiting. Arthur stood to meet him. "Arthur," Sterling said, extending a hand, the edges of controlled fury still sharp in his voice. "It's good to see you, though I hate that it's under circumstances this outrageous." Arthur shook his hand firmly, surprised by how steady he felt. "Didn't think I'd ever use that number," he said. "I'm glad you did," Sterling replied. Then, without turning his head, he raised a hand and pointed. "Teller, get your manager, now." Kevin had been frozen in place since the moment Sterling entered, mouth slightly open, eyes wide with recognition. The kid scrambled to respond, stammering something unintelligible before hurrying toward the back offices. The entire staff seemed to stop moving, like someone had unplugged their programming. Sterling didn't wait for Kevin to return. He turned to one of the 2 people who had entered with him, a woman with a badge clipped to her suit jacket, and gave a quiet instruction. Then he looked back to Arthur. "Come with me," he said. already striding toward the manager's office like he owned every brick of the building. And, technically, he did. The manager's office door was closed, but Sterling didn't knock. He opened it like it was his own and stepped inside. Kevin trailed behind him, clearly terrified, while the second woman, Arthur assumed she was security, stood posted just outside the doorway. Inside, the air was still, the office eerily quiet compared to the buzzing lobby outside. Within another minute, the branch manager, Miss Evans, appeared. Just returning from lunch, plastic salad container still in hand, confusion written all over her face. She took one look at Sterling standing in her office and nearly dropped her food. She didn't need an introduction. Everyone in the company knew the face from corporate memos and the annual shareholder meeting videos. "Miss Evans," Sterling said, loud enough for the lobby to hear, "bring me Mr. Harrison's full account file, now." The entire bank froze again. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that, but from the sudden realization that something extraordinary was happening. Not a robbery, not a security breach, but a reckoning. A moment where a faceless system had finally been challenged by someone with both the authority and the will to do the right thing. Arthur stayed silent as they walked into the office. He had nothing more to prove. He had made the call, the right one. Now, everything was moving fast. The tide was turning, and Arthur didn't even need to raise his voice to push it forward. What had started as a routine Tuesday had now turned into something far larger than just a frozen account. The CEO of the entire banking corporation had arrived not with a press team or a boardroom schedule, but with sleeves rolled up and judgment in his eyes. And every single person in that building, staff, customer, manager, and teller, was about to find out what real leadership looked like. Inside the manager's office, the air was thick. Not just with tension, but with the kind of unspoken awareness that precedes a professional reckoning. James Sterling didn't sit down. He remained standing, his posture rigid but composed, like a loaded spring. Miss Evans stood across from him, her hands visibly shaking, a printed file folder clenched tight to her chest. Kevin, the teller, hovered by the door like a student sent to the principal's office, only now realizing this wasn't just a reprimand. It might be a career-defining moment. Arthur was invited to sit by one of Sterling's assistants, but he chose to remain standing as well, out of respect for what this was quickly becoming. This wasn't a meeting, it was a tribunal. Sterling took the folder from Miss Evans without a word, flipped it open and scanned the contents. His expression darkened further. Then he closed it with one sharp motion that echoed faintly against the glass. "Miss Evans, teller Kevin." His voice was measured, dangerously calm. "Mr. Harrison has been a customer at this bank for over 40 years. He is a decorated veteran who has always conducted his financial affairs with consistency and integrity. Today, his federal pension was flagged and frozen by your system. When he asked for assistance, he was handed a pamphlet." Kevin looked down. Miss Evans opened her mouth to speak, but Sterling raised a hand, barely a motion, but it silenced her completely. "I am holding in my hand," Sterling continued, "a documented system log showing that the flag was generated by a CPU side update deployed at 3:12 a.m. this morning. That update was pushed without full compliance testing on government disbursement categories. That's problem one. Problem two is this branch's complete failure to recognize the nature of the hold and escalate it. Problem three, the most disturbing of all, is that Mr. Harrison explained he needed those funds for his wife's medication. He made the urgency clear. He asked for compassion, and what did he receive? He turned his gaze directly to Kevin, who now looked like he wanted the floor to open and swallow him. "Did you attempt a manual override verification?" Sterling asked, voice colder now. "Did you consult the Veteran Account Protocol Documentation, Section 7 Alpha? Did you contact the dedicated CPU liaison for emergency pension holds?" Kevin's voice cracked. I wasn't aware of 7 Alpha, sir." "Then you are untrained," Sterling snapped. "You are not simply unaware, you are unprepared to handle frontline financial emergencies. And Miss Evans," he said, pivoting to the branch manager, "you are responsible for the training of your staff. If your tellers don't know how to respond when a veteran is denied access to life-critical funds, then you have failed this bank, and you have failed our customers." Miss Evans tried again. "We follow strict protocol for all flagged accounts, sir. It's to prevent fraud. I had no idea the hold was a mistake." You're not paid to know everything, Sterling cut in. You're paid to know when something is wrong and fix it. This wasn't some obscure technical failure. This was a veteran asking for help. Your system gave him red tape. Your teller gave him a brochure. There was a pause. Then Sterling reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a corporate secure smartphone. He dialed a number, waited 2 seconds. Security, he said into the phone. This is Sterling. Lift the CPU hold on account ending 4281 Harrison Arthur. Flag the account for immediate priority processing. I want diagnostics on the false flag trigger and a written summary by EOD. Another pause, then, good. He hung up and turned back to Arthur, and in a complete shift of tone and presence said, Mr. Harrison, your account is now fully accessible. Withdrawals, transfers, everything. And as a formal apology from First National Fidelity and its parent corporation, today's medical expense will be covered entirely by us. But that's not all. For the next 12 months, all co-pays related to your wife's prescribed medications will be paid through my office's discretionary fund. Arthur's eyes widened. He opened his mouth, stunned, searching for the right words. Mr. Sterling, I don't know what to say. Sterling stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. Then don't. You've already done your part. You served this country. You trusted this bank. We're the ones who owe you more than words. We owe you action. Arthur gave a small nod, his throat tight, but the reckoning wasn't over. Sterling turned back to the 2 staff members. Expect a full review from HR and regional operations. You will undergo retraining and your roles will be re-evaluated, effective immediately. He paused, then spoke more broadly, his voice now projecting past the walls of the office into the lobby, where a dozen heads had been tilted just slightly, listening. Let this be clear. Our systems exist to support human judgment, not to replace it. When an automated process stands in the way of decency, it must be bypassed, especially for those who've earned more than bureaucratic indifference. This bank does not and will not mistreat veterans. The room was silent again. Kevin looked like he might be sick. Miss Evans looked pale, eyes fixed on the folder she no longer held. And Arthur, he looked like a man who had carried a heavy weight through the fog, only to find, finally, that someone had cleared the path for him. The next few minutes moved quickly. Miss Evans personally handled Arthur's withdrawal. She didn't speak unless spoken to. The funds for Martha's medication were confirmed, allocated, and documented. Sterling's assistant stayed close, verifying each step. Kevin was quietly sent home, pending administrative review. Arthur, meanwhile, thanked each person who now treated him with reverence, though he never once raised his voice or demanded an apology. He didn't need to. The act itself had spoken louder than anything he could have said. By the time Arthur stepped out of the manager's office and back into the main lobby, something had shifted, not just in the air, but in the posture of every person inside that building. The usual rhythm of the bank had gone quiet, the casual murmur of transactions and light chatter replaced by something more reverent, almost reverent. Customers had paused mid-application. Staff members stood frozen near terminals and printers. Even the security guard near the front door, normally stoic and disengaged, now stood straighter, eyes subtly tracking Arthur as he walked past. No one quite knew the full story, but everyone knew something extraordinary had just happened. And at the center of it was a man they'd probably never noticed before today. A man in an old army jacket with weathered hands and calm eyes, who had just reminded the entire institution that rules don't make decisions. People do. Miss Evans, now subdued and hyper-attentive, followed a step behind, carrying a receipt folder, offering quiet reassurances that everything was properly processed. She thanked him, twice. So did the assistant manager, and someone from corporate operations who had arrived in a rush, breathless just moments after Sterling's appearance. They all thanked him, not for his patience, not for his compliance, but for what they now realized he had exposed. A blind spot in their system, a gap in their training, a dangerous absence of empathy they hadn't seen until it stood in front of them, asking for help and getting turned away. Sterling lingered for only a few more minutes after the withdrawal was complete. He made a point of speaking to the remaining staff, no longer sharp or confrontational, but with a steady tone of finality. Systems are supposed to work for people, he said. When they don't, it's not just a glitch, it's a failure. Let this be the last time a veteran has to explain why his wife's health matters more than a software update. Then he nodded once to Arthur and left, followed by his team. No press, no announcement, just decisive action and a reminder of what leadership is supposed to look like. Word of the incident spread fast, far faster than anyone expected. Within hours, the story was being whispered not just among the employees at that branch, but across the district. Emails started pinging from corporate, calls were made, meetings were scheduled. What happened with Arthur Harrison didn't get buried in a report. It lit a fire. By the end of the week, every First National Fidelity branch received a policy update. Effective immediately, all veteran accounts would receive prioritized support, streamlined verification, and mandatory escalation procedures for any flags affecting pensions or medical-related withdrawals. A specialized team, Veteran Affairs Financial Response, was launched out of headquarters to serve as a direct contact point for service members and their families. But it didn't stop at policy. Sterling personally commissioned a training overhaul. Not a surface-level PR-driven checklist, but real scenario-based retraining built around empathy, accountability, and critical thinking. Every teller, manager, and even regional director was required to complete it. Not optional, not a webinar to click through. In-person sessions, designed with real consequences. Because what had happened to Arthur wasn't an isolated incident, it was a symptom, and now the cure was in motion. As for Arthur, he went straight from the bank to the pharmacy. He handed over the money, covered in full, and brought home the medication Martha so badly needed. She was sitting by the window when he returned, wrapped in her favorite knitted shawl, trying to breathe a little easier but still frail, still fighting. He kissed her forehead, placed the small bag on the kitchen counter and poured her a glass of water. Neither of them said much at first. Words weren't necessary. What mattered was that the medicine was there, that the promise had been kept, that even when the system had failed, someone had answered. Over the next few days, Arthur received more phone calls than he had in months. Not just from family, not just from friends who'd heard the story through local chatter, but from people within the bank itself. One of Sterling's senior assistants called just to check in and make sure the new policies were working. Another from Veteran Services followed up to ask if Arthur would consider being a quiet advisor on the new outreach initiative. Arthur didn't want recognition. He wasn't interested in press or thanks. But he agreed to share his thoughts, because if something good could grow from that terrible morning, he wanted it to help others. Men and women like him who didn't have a back-channel contact, who wouldn't think to call a CEO, who might just give up when the system said, wait. He never saw Kevin again. The teller had been removed from the branch that same day. Whether he was transferred or dismissed, Arthur never found out, and truthfully, he didn't need to. Kevin had been young, inexperienced, more trained in button-clicking than in critical thinking. Arthur didn't hold a grudge. He hoped privately that Kevin learned something that day, that it stayed with him longer than any disciplinary memo ever could. Miss Evans remained at the branch, though she was quieter now, more attentive. Arthur noticed the way she greeted customers personally, how she watched the tellers more closely, occasionally stepping in when someone looked confused or unsure. There was something different in her now, not fear, but awareness, the kind that can only come from realizing just how close you came to failing someone in a way that truly matters. And then there was Sterling. Every now and then Arthur's phone would buzz with a short text, nothing flashy, just a line or two. Checking in. How's Martha? Or new policy launched today. Thanks again. Two men, decades apart in service, bonded not by rank or title, but by a moment of clarity in a world often clouded by bureaucracy. Arthur never asked for attention, but he got something better. Change. A small, meaningful shift in how one of the nation's largest financial institutions viewed its role. And that was more than enough. He had walked into the bank that morning needing $400. He walked out with dignity restored, not just for himself, but for every veteran who might follow behind him. Because sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to sit quietly while the system shrugs, one person to call out the flaw, one person to say, enough, and when the right person hears that call, everything can change.